I'm Kristin Etter, and this is Sidebar Immigration, a podcast about immigration law with Texas grit. No suits, no jargon, just real talk from experts in the field. We break down complex immigration issues in a way that's clear and relevant for everyone. Whether it's policy deep dives, big picture conversations, or candid interviews with advocates, we're here to make sense of it all without the legalese. If you're looking for straight answers and expert insights, you're in the right place. Hi, welcome back to Sidebar Immigration. We are back, and this topic is refugee resettlement and how it has changed since January 20th. This week, we are joined by Briana and Sam, and I'm so honored to have both of you on today, where we will get to hear about Sam's journey from refugee to U.S. citizen and about Briana's amazing work helping refugees navigate a system that is often as complex as it is life-changing. I'm also joined by my podcast host, Bobby Painter. So thank you, Bobby, for joining. And he'll be jumping in from time to time as well to help us with this conversation. So I'd love to start by asking each of you to introduce yourselves, your organization, and the work your organization does. And let's start with you, Briana.
Hi, Kristin. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Briana Perez. I am an immigration attorney originally from San Antonio, Texas. I'm currently a supervising attorney in the U.S. Legal Department at IRAP, which is the International Refugee Assistance Project. Our organization assists clients with various humanitarian pathways to the U.S., including with the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. And Sam, it's an honor to have you. If you would like to introduce yourself, your organization, and the work that your organization does.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Samuel Uwimana. I am a former refugee. I like to start with that. But right now, I am a U.S. citizen. Became a citizen 2 years ago. I am the founder and the executive director of United Refugee Services, based here in Amarillo, Texas, where we do receive many refugees per capita. I mean, if you see in the U.S., we are one of the cities that has resettled a high number of people, refugees, displaced people here in the U.S. I have an experience working with refugees since 2019. That's about an experience of 6 years where we tackled issues like language barriers, which is one of the major hurdles that refugees do face when they come to the USA. They don't have the English language skills. They have some proficiency. Their proficiency is not adequate or efficient. We have a variety of programs where we have English learning that is launching soon. But of course, we have these minor discussions, these interactive meetings, and also events. We also have one of our biggest programs is a refuge driver education project. We understand how important it is for them to understand the traffic laws here in Texas so that we can reduce a number of crashes or even, you know, how challenging it is to drive if if you never drove before or you're not familiar with vehicles. We also have another program that is really dear to my heart, which is Refuge in Friendship, where we just be friends with refugees so we can empower communities to flourish, where they can find safety and security in these newer communities of American people. Lastly, we have immigration services, where we do help them adjust their status, like getting their green cards, if they want to go back home, getting their travel documents, and also, of course, become U.S. citizens after 4 years and 10 months or 5 years in America. Thank you so much.
That's amazing, Sam. Thank you so much. And I cannot wait to hear more about your journey and your amazing organization. And I guess before we do that, I want to take a step back. And Briana, let's kind of put this into context. So a lot of our listeners don't understand like the complexities or the intricacies of immigration law. And we really want to break it down for our listeners. So could you start by explaining the difference between a refugee and an asylum seeker?
Absolutely. So under U.S. law, a refugee is someone who is located outside of the United States and who meets the definition of a refugee, which we can cover in a second, and is found admissible to the United States. So The definition of a refugee is someone who can demonstrate they were persecuted or fear persecution due to their race, their religion, their nationality, their political opinion, or their membership in a particular social group, and that they can show they have not been firmly resettled in another country that is not their home country. An asylum seeker is somebody already in the United States or who is seeking admission at a port of entry, for example, arriving at the southern border, who meets this definition of a refugee. That person can then apply for asylum here in the United States, and if they're granted, then they'll be an asylee.
Okay, thanks for that. And in terms of the refugee resettlement process, there have been a lot of changes in that process recently since January 20th. But let's rewind and talk about how the refugee resettlement process used to work before January 20th of this year.
Yes, so the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, sometimes shortened by immigration lawyers to U.S. RAP, was established in the 1980 Refugee Act. This is a program that has long held bipartisan support. It has not really been a target of political attack until recently. The Refugee Admission Program was incorporated later into the INA. So essentially, the process for US RAP is there are 4 kind of priority categories, ways that people can enter into the program. The most common is that individual cases are referred by UNHCR, which is a subdivision of the United Nations, US embassies, or other designated NGOs. Those individuals are then processed via a resettlement support center. That resettlement support center outside of the US does a pre-screening interview, kind of preps the case file, and then starts like initial security checks. Then the case is passed to USCIS, which is a branch under the Department of Homeland Security. USCIS conducts an interview to determine if the applicant meets the definition of a refugee and is admissible. Additional security screenings take place. If approved, that individual goes through a medical screening. Then travel is arranged. Finally, if everything goes well, everything's approved, the applicant travels and an additional security check. It happens at the port of entry, at the airport, right? And so that's a pathway for someone to arrive to the United States under this program. 1 year after admittance, that refugee can then apply to be a lawful permanent resident, a green card holder. And then after 5 years in the United States, that person can apply to naturalize to become a US citizen. So as you can see, it's long, it's complicated, but it is a way for a refugee to eventually naturalize. And along the way, there are many, many points where that individual is screened, is security checked. This population is one of the most security vetted of any arriving at our ports of entry.
As you explain that process, is there an average time? And I know, Briana, both you and Bobby have done quite a bit of work representing refugees and helping refugees come to this country. What is the approximate timeline for something like this? Before we hear about Sam's journey and how long it took him, what is the average kind of timeline we're looking at for somebody to come here as a refugee?
Sure. So like you said, Kristin, it can really depend on where this individual is located and considerations, and everyone's case is different. But the average timeline from referral to arrival in the United States is between 18 to 24 months.
And I'll just add, most of my experience working in this area has focused on asylum seekers. So that second cohort that you mentioned, Briana, people who are applying to prove up that they meet the definition of refugee here within the US. And I would say on average, their journey is quite a bit longer. Yes, they're physically present in the US, but at this point, I think depending on the posture of the case, it's reasonable to assume that most asylum seekers are looking at a 5 to 10 year period where their application is pending before they get any decision in their case. And in some cases longer. I've worked on cases that took well over a decade to resolve because there were appeals or other things involved. And I just also, to underscore your point, Brianna, about the security, since I think this is a common misconception about the system, is that even for asylum seekers, folks who didn't go through vetting abroad prior to coming to the US, there is a significant amount of vetting that goes on with asylum applications here in the US too. I had an experience just a week or so ago at the Houston Asylum Office here in Texas where an officer commented to me that it was almost ridiculous for him to be asking certain security questions because by the time he gets to the point where he's asking them, they know everything about that client or applicant backwards and forwards. And if there were an issue, it would have come up well before the time they sat down for an interview.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right, Bobby. And just to underscore, that general timeline is a historic timeline. So things have really shifted post-pandemic and with, Trump 1.0 and now Trump 2.0, the process has only gotten more complicated, longer, and exactly what Bobby is saying, and both for refugees and asylees, these are applications that have really gone through the ringer on all fronts.
Yeah, and before we turn to how the Refugee Resettlement Program has changed since January 20th, I want to bring you in, Sam. And I've read a bit about you, and you have such an amazing and inspiring journey about how you came to the United States from the Democratic Republic of Congo and your experience living as a refugee. Could you tell us a little bit about what the refugee resettlement process was like from your experience?
Oh, wow. It took longer than expected. It took me 8 years to be resettled here in America. Unlike what we are seeing here in these times in the US, where we have Afrikaners coming from South Africa. I mean, President Trump just approved this, I think, a few weeks ago, and he took office in January 20th. And now these people, oh, they're being persecuted. That might be correct. When it took me 8 years from Kenya coming here to the USA. So yeah, I was a refugee from Congo. I was born in Rwanda. My mom was pregnant of me when she was fleeing second war of Congo. And we lived in Rwanda for 10 years. Then in 2011, no, September 2010, going to 2011, we displaced to Kenya, seeking refuge, seeking asylum there, where we were accepted as refugees. We lived there for 8 years, as I said, before being accepted or resettled here in the USA. We have to go through UNHCR, as Briana said. You have to register yourself as a refugee through the UN Agency of Refugees. They vet you, okay, where are you coming from? Okay, how can we help you? You're living here in Kenya as your secondary country. Okay, we have registered you, go back home and wait. And most of them do live in refugee camps. Fortunately, I was living in Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya, trying to make a living where it was not easy. If you read my book that was written by other storybook project here in town, it's an amazing story.
And Sam, can you tell the listeners what is the name of your book?
The name of my book is called The Unbeatable Uwimana.
Okay.
Yeah, The Unbeatable Uwimana. You can look it up on the refugelanguage.org. That's another nonprofit, amazing nonprofit that I worked with in the past and still work with them very close, even up to now. So yeah, it took me 8 years, Kristin.
And I guess, when you come over as a refugee, do you get to pick, like, how did you end up in Amarillo? And can you describe kind of what that was like when you came over?
Yeah, in most cases, they ask you if you have a US tie that they can connect you with, which is very good and kind that they get to ask that question. So to reduce emotional things that come with being resettled in a new country, or in some cases, they might not even ask you, they just send you to a different city with no clue, like with no idea who you're going to find there. But of course, they have refuge resettlement agencies that have caseworkers that go to the airport to pick up the refugees and get them an apartment, and of course, give them RCA, refugee case assistant, or even RNP that receive them and place them in the neighborhoods.
And you said that Amarillo has a high number of refugees. Why is that?
Oh, I like to think that is because there is these meat plants, there is meat plantations There is job opportunities where they don't require you to have a degree. There is no level of education you have to have achieved for you to get a job. I do see this in big cities like Dallas, Houston, where there is no these meat plantations. People are really doing other jobs that you have to just be creative to survive. But of course, jobs that refugees do here in America is something that can be reconsidered and see if there is any better opportunities where we can place these amazing friends of ours.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like you kind of started out working in one of these meatpacking plants. The Panhandle has meatpacking and poultry. And can you tell us a little bit about the industry there and how reliant those plants are on refugee workers?
Yeah, fortunately, these plants they do hire refugees and immigrants. That is their highest employees, and sometimes it can shift. We have some of them who are seeking job right now, who are if they can just get a job, like they long for this opportunity. But we also have many of our parents. You can imagine my mom works at Tyson at the age of 65. It's ridiculous. These are very physically demanding jobs, but that is because she has no education. All her life was just fighting for survival to get these ends meet. We have Tyson here, Tyson Foods. We have JBS in Cactus, Texas. We have Cargill in Hereford that all hires. And I do also help them with job applications from different backgrounds. So if they are struggling to get a job, of course, I have a good connection with these companies where we can shoot them an email, hey, please hire this person. But in terms of industries, we don't have many industries. 99% rely on these job opportunities.
Yeah.
It's
And I
just-
guess before I turn to Briana to talk about how the policy and the refugee resettlement program has changed in the last few months, Sam, I guess what would your area of Texas, the Texas Panhandle, look like without refugees working in those industries?
We would see a very decrease in economy because these are productive member of society. Regardless of okay, we understand they do physical demanding jobs, fine, but at least they are surviving. At least they are making a living. They are supporting this next generation that can become anything. That's why we are here. That's why we have this space to empower these young generations. It's okay. We can let our parents struggle, but we have the young ones who can thrive and compete like same as an American kid, um, the Panhandle area could be so affected financially, economically, and also we have vibrant cultures here. We make our cities look more beautiful. The diversity here is I mean, it's out of this world. We have all people from different walks of life living in our neighborhoods. So we have to embrace that beauty. But on the economic part, we could see a very decrease in local taxes. This company could even close. We have seen this in the past where the CHNV for the Cubans and Haitians, we saw the density these companies were facing. Like, oh, where are we going to get workers since they want to kick out these amazing people from Haiti who came as humanitarian parolees? And even the way the administration of President Trump was painting that picture of them like, oh, they're just parolees. No, these people came on humanitarian parolees. They were excluding the word humanitarian. These people didn't come from prisons or jails from Haiti. No, they were people who are being paroled and people to be, to be looked out for.
If I could, I think it's really important to emphasize that what Sam's describing going on in the Panhandle is a trend we've seen play out all over the country. Before moving to Texas, I used to live and work in Minneapolis, which was a major refugee resettlement hub as well. And you would see the same trend over and over again, where cohorts of folks would be resettled from different countries into the Twin Cities. But then there would be a secondary migration pattern whereby they would go out to rural areas, largely driven by meatpacking, just as it is here, and would go to Austin, Minnesota, or Barron County, Wisconsin, or St. Cloud, Minnesota, or Waterloo, Iowa, these kind of small towns, and really play a huge role in reinvigorating them. Initially just by working in plants that were starved for labor, but then subsequently opening up businesses, putting their kids into the schools. And there are countless stories you can read about throughout the Midwest and the Panhandle and elsewhere where refugees have been major drivers in revitalizing communities that were struggling.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Bobby. It's not just the economic benefit that we receive in our country from refugees, but also just the cultural vibrancy, the business development, the benefits that people receive just from a cultural perspective and a vibrancy that you talked about, Sam. And I guess that turns me to want to talk a little bit more with you, Briana, about since the Trump administration returned to office on January 20th, what have been the biggest policy changes and shifts that you've seen in refugee resettlement?
Absolutely. So things have changed completely in the world of the refugee admissions program. So on January 20th, President Trump signed an executive order which suspended entries through the refugee admissions program starting January 27th, suspended all current adjudications, and cut funding for refugee resettlement programs. So essentially, took the entire program to its knees. Organizations who provide these essential services have lost funding, meaning many have shuttered completely or have lost alarmingly high numbers of employees, of course, meaning they can no longer provide these essential services. Since the signing of that executive order, there have been some developments. IRAP, the organization I work for, filed a lawsuit. It's Pasito v. Trump, if anyone wants to look for more details, in the Ninth Circuit, representing individuals and organizations directly impacted by the executive order, challenging the abrupt halt to the program and the overnight dismantling of the entire system. Currently, of course, it's in progress before the court, but we have won a preliminary injunction, meaning that anyone who had an approved application and confirmable travel plans to the US on or before January 20th, their processing, their travel should resume. So we're waiting to see how that will play out in practice. But that's where kind of the lawsuit stands right now. That is a very narrow group of refugees, of course, that are affected by that preliminary injunction. Otherwise, really the entire ecosystem is frozen while we wait to see what happens next.
That's great. I'm so happy to hear about that lawsuit, Briana. And I guess in terms of the numbers, what would it look like if you were to ultimately win the lawsuit? So you're saying anybody who had a pending application on or before January 20th would be allowed to resettle as was promised to them by the federal government, but that the January 20th pause would continue unless there's a carve out for another group like the one that Sam talked about today, the Afrikaners, the white South Africans being able to come over. So talk to us a little bit about the impact of that litigation if you prevail, which I hope and anticipate you will.
Yes, I hope so as well. So the preliminary injunction means that right now, processing for those individuals who had confirmable travel plans on or before January 20th will continue if the court agrees with us and rules for us in the ultimate kind of decision of the lawsuit. The challenge of the lawsuit is that the Trump administration overstepped their executive authority to issue this executive order in the first place. The refugee admissions program is something congressionally authorized. Previously, the extent the executive branch had impact on this program is setting a ceiling limit of how many refugees could be admitted per fiscal year. That was really the executive's ability to impact the program directly. This complete halt, we believe, and it's the assertion of the lawsuit, is beyond the executive's authority. So should the lawsuit ultimately prevail, it would show, right, that this executive order should be thrown out in its entirety.
And I think that's an important point because, correct me if I'm wrong, Briana, but I think under the previous Trump administration, they didn't attempt to go this far. If I recall, they reduced the cap on admissions per fiscal year down significantly from what it was under the Obama administration, but there was still a refugee admissions program effectively, just operating on a much smaller scale. But this time around, the program itself has been essentially wiped out.
That's right, Bobby. For some historical context, this may be instructive. In Reagan's first term under this program, about 389,000 refugees were resettled to the United States. In Trump's first term, 118,000 refugees were resettled. So we can see how in recent years, those numbers have decreased pretty drastically.
I'm trying to make sense of the data here so that people can kind of get a sense for what sort of numbers we're talking about. And I'm looking at refugee admissions data from like the 70s onward. And it looks like, I mean, there's a lot of variability because of COVID and other things, but the average annual admissions seems to fall somewhere between 50 and 80,000. Does that sound accurate to you?
Yeah, so the ceiling sets by each administration is the maximum, right? It's like that's the limit. We see pretty frequently that refugee admissions do not touch that ceiling. They don't really come as close as we would like it to be. So I'd have to look at the data directly, but that sounds like
for sure. And some important context for listeners, at least in recent years, Texas has led the US among states in terms of the total number of refugees resettled into the region, both in terms of the US RAP program, but also looking just at the Operation Allies Welcome program, which was a separate process to resettle Afghans after the Taliban took over. Texas had something like 10% of the total nationwide of Afghans resettled just to this region. So there is a legacy at the state level, despite all of the rhetoric around this issue, of being a huge welcoming place for refugees.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess, that brings me to you, Sam. What do you think could be the long-term implications of ending the refugee resettlement program that Briana just talked about? And how, I guess, specifically could that impact your organization, the United Refugee Services in Amarillo, and your community in the Panhandle?
We have already seen, resettling organization agencies, laying off staff. Like that means people are losing their job opportunities. There is some funds or income that is being lost, and not only just that, hurting these refugee admission programs could result to people getting some mental health issues. I think we talked about this last week with the state refuge coordinator. His name is Jeff. We do have these quarterly meetings. He said he has noticed some mental health issues in the refuge communities because, they have family back home. They want to be reunited, but these opportunities are being taken away by the Trump's administration. Families are being, I'll give you an example. In March, there is a Nicaraguan lady who self-deported herself. She self-deported herself. You can imagine, just because of that, the letters that Department of Homeland Security had sent out to their addresses. Why? She's not a criminal. She does not have any bad record of committing or breaking any laws in Texas. But she preferred just to self-deport herself, which was then paused the April 25th, that they had to be out of the country by April 25th. Here in our city, we could see the flourishment of our economies could go down drastically, because you have to know this about refugees. Refugees are a nomad population. They might be in your city today, but they're going to leave your city tomorrow if there is no job opportunities. So we are seeing this in Amarillo. They are going to Des Moines, Iowa. They're going to Kansas City, Missouri, because they don't see a future here in Amarillo. They go somewhere where they can fit in, when they can stand out here in our cities. Amarillo is a very, a city with potential, with endless opportunities, but they go somewhere just to fit in because that's where they feel like they can make it.
And what do you think Amarillo could do to
Mhm.
help keep people in the region?
I mean, as I said, mental health, they have to create a conducive environment. They have to really stand up and speak for their people. These are people who have invested in this city. These are people who they have lived here since 2004. They have built this city. They have to be a voice. They have to do whatever possible in the school districts. They have to take care of these kids. They have to reduce the tension that is coming with the Trump administration, with the ICE. We have people who have immigration holds. It's just getting out of hand. But really, the city has to do its best. We do try to speak with our city council, with our city mayor. These are amazing guys, and they listen to us. That's why we kind of have hope that our communities will be safe, and we are going to fight for them, regardless of what these people are throwing to us. We cannot give up on our people.
Yeah, thank you,
Mhm.
Sam. And I guess when you talk about immigrants that have come here the right way, I mean, as you and Briana and Bobby talked about, I mean, these are people that literally have spent years filling out papers, going through screenings, being vetted, being given permission, and continue to follow every rule that they've been given, right? So why can't we continue to make Texas a welcoming place for them? And, Brianna, I guess that brings me to you to talk about what do you see as the implications of ending the refugee resettlement program, even if, again, you're successful, what happens to people that might want to apply after January 20th? And how could that impact, obviously, the refugees themselves, but also our state?
Absolutely. I mean, what you and Sam were talking about is really exactly what we see as well. Individuals who are in the US RAP pipeline, who have started this process, who are awaiting adjudication, who are awaiting interviews. These are individuals who have invested time and effort into this process. They have put their faith into this process. They have invested in their goal of coming to the United States, many of whom are planning on reuniting with family members, friends, communities, pulling the rug out from under them and simply stopping this major pathway to the United States is a disservice, of course, to these individuals, but it's also a disservice to our own communities. We should see it as a point of pride that individuals seeking safety see the United States as a place where they can find that safety, that stability, and a way to move forward and make lives for themselves. These are individuals that want to come here and work and build community, and they should be allowed to do so.
And I guess let me talk to each of you, and I'll start with you, Sam. But what can everyday people do to support refugees during this challenging time? What are some concrete things, I guess, first of all, that people can do in Amarillo? You mentioned that your mayor is supportive. What would you want listeners to know, and what would you want listeners who are concerned to do?
We have a very supportive community here that are welcoming. They have really spoken up. They have used their social media platforms. There is a lady, I believe I forgot her name, but I'm sorry. She adopted this guy from Haiti, and then she invested her time and money. Then when the issuance of self-deportation was given, she was really losing hope. Like, I care about this son, and now this program of Trump's wants to separate me from my adopted son. But then that was her time to shine. That was her time to use her power to speak up for people like her son, and even all the people who came through that program, CHNV, the humanitarian parolees. So there is power that lies in the communities. When we come together, even if they are conservatives, fine. Even if they are liberals, but when you come to speak up for a common cause, to protect people, they're not criminals. There's some misconception that this media that has painted people pictures like they are bad guys. These are the people that President Trump speaks about. Yeah, oh, you are one of those people. No, refugees are one of, if you really invest your time and educate them, they are one of the kindest people you could ever meet. All these parolees, all these asylum seekers, they just want safety, as Briana said. They want safety and improve their families, make a living, buy a home in America, and achieve the American dream. I'll give you an example. There is a way where President Trump and his administration and his advisors, like Stephen Miller, they're trying to make things, and of course, the Department of Homeland Security, they make things complicated. Even these forms to apply for an employment card, these forms are changing every single minute. Like you apply today, and next week they're saying like, no, you filed a different form. Use this version. So they are making these changes just to complicate stuff, to complicate these processes of how can I say it? They're complicating anything possible so these people can now feel comfortable. Hey, you don't belong here. You do not belong here. Do this again. And you know why they do it? They just want to make people get this distress and all these difficulties that they throw your way.
Yeah, and Sam, you brought up an excellent point about your mayor being very receptive and very supportive of the refugee community in Amarillo. And it brings me to an issue that I think is really interesting that listeners, for them to take away, and that is this is not or should not be a political issue, right? This is about how we can have people in our country, we can afford them opportunity, we can help them if they're fleeing and need a safe place. And also, we benefit because we're adding people that have been vetted, that come here and want to work, that want to make a better life for them and their family. And that in turn makes life better for ourselves and our families, right? So this should not be a conservative or a liberal issue. And in fact, the city that you live in, Amarillo, is a very conservative part of the state, right?
Very.
What have you seen in terms of the nonpartisan or bipartisan or, both sides of the political spectrum? Really, I think is an interesting testament to how great the Panhandle is because they realize that there is a benefit to them, right? So it's not just a benefit to people that are able to come and become American citizens and contribute, but it also benefits them. Do you think that's why your mayor is supportive and other industries that are typically the conservative industries are supportive?
Yes, I believe Amarillo cities has really done a very good job comparing to other cities in the U.S. in just making these are unprecedented times. Sorry, English is like my third language in the history. But we are here for you. We have had these refuge advisory meetings, council meetings, where we talk about how people are being affected and the misconceptions that is in the communities out here. And also making sure that we tell them the true story, now what they are hearing in the media. Because if you pay attention to the media, there is a lot of lies in the media. We all know this. It depends on how they say the story, what they want people to hear. And now not what we see every day. They just want to say everything. But having our mayor being supportive is one of the biggest signs. I believe he's also a conservative. He wants the U.S. people, the Americans, to be safe and to be safe from crimes. But again, they understand that refugees in Amarillo are unique. These are unique people. These are a big part of our. They are very important people in our city. If refugees ever leave Amarillo, I can't think that there will be much going on here. I'll be honest with you. It will be just like, okay, a bunch of Americans doing office jobs. There is no much going on. It will be a very boring city. I'm being honest.
And not just boring, Sam. I think I want to impress this on our listeners. Not just boring, but where are Americans going to get their hamburgers, their chicken, when those plants have to close because there aren't workers there?
Yeah, we have here, we are, Texas is a very cattle state. Where are they going to get these good steaks at these fancy restaurants being served? It's just because the refugees are doing the behind the scene work that the Americans do not want to do. That's why there is If you see the employees, they're just immigrants, people who want to make a living and survive. In fact, they should come together and be creative, find ways to help. Otherwise, our friends will get into depression. I'll give you an example. I do work in court. Even this week, I have a few appointments there. When a refugee face law, when he gets in trouble, when he has broken law, that's when they wish to go back to their home country, irregardless of the conflict, irregardless if their country is messed up, irregardless if there is bad leadership. They get tired of America. Like, is this how it is? I didn't know that I got in trouble. I didn't know that what I was doing was I was breaking law. No, please take me back home. Although it's not possible for them to go back home right away, there is a process, of course, to leave the country. But that's just a simple example how they can get tired quickly here in America if they face some challenging stuff. They're just like, no, we don't want this. Even if US offers us money, jobs, they give us employment, we can make thousands of dollars, yes, but no, we do not want it. So they're just here to be safe and improve their lives.
Yeah. And Briana, what about from your perspective? What can people do to support refugees? What can people do to support your organization and the amazing work that you all do day in and day out during these really challenging times?
I think foremost, Kristin, I think it's very important for listeners and just average community members to do their best to try and see through the rhetoric and parse out the truth. Refugees and asylees are not new inventions by the left wing, no matter what this administration may want you to believe. These are definitions and rights to seek access enshrined in both US and international law for decades on decades. These programs have like a historic context of receiving bipartisan support, like we talked about. This is nothing new. This is nothing distinct. This is simply a continuation of what being an American means, right? We are all from other places. We all come, if you are not related to an indigenous American community, we are all the descendants of immigrants. In terms of what individuals can do right now, it's just very important to see that these new strategies by part of this administration are a coordinated xenophobic effort to close the United States off from the rest of the world. Okay. Refugees are some of the most vetted new arrivals to the United States. This is nothing dramatic. This is nothing drastic. This is commonplace programming for arrivals to the US. I would encourage individuals to look into what's going on in their local communities, like organizations Sam works for. A lot of these organizations are going through difficult times. It may be possible, right, to contribute directly, either financially, through volunteer hours. I would encourage individuals to reach out to their local governments to see what programs are available for refugees in their communities. And I would encourage individuals to call their member of Congress to let them know that they do support US RAP and that they want Congress to reassert themselves in this process. US RAP is congressionally authorized. The executive branch has no business overturning it simply through an executive order.
Yeah, to add on what Briana just said, I'm thankful for our congressman here, Ronnie Jackson and his team. Actually, they do attend our refuge advisory meetings, council meetings. In our last council meeting, there was Daniel Varid and also Christy Morrow. These are people from the congressman's office. So them being part of these conversations, I mean, improves, assures us that we are safe as refugees in Amarillo City, in Texas, and that there is still hope that can be transferred from here to other cities in the USA.
That's great. I'm going to make sure that we include the links, Briana, for your organization, Sam, for your organization, I guess if we can end on a hopeful note, first of all, Briana, I'm hopeful that you win your litigation, your lawsuit. Um, when we think about the future of refugee resettlement in our country, is there a way to take this experience and really this true devastation of a program that we have had that has worked so well, not just for refugees from around the world, but for our own country and for our own local communities? Is there a way that we can improve? And what can we kind of look to in the future after maybe whatever ends up happening under this administration? Let's kind of fast forward. And if each one of you, Bobby, Briana, Sam, can talk a little bit about what changes would you like to see and how would you like a refugee resettlement program to be even better in the future?
I have lots of thoughts on this, but I'll try to condense them. I think there are two big picture things that I would like to see done differently. The first is assuming we were going back to a rational system whereby, and by rational, I mean we have a functioning US RAP program and we have a functioning asylum application system within the US. There need to be reforms that allow that process to go much more quickly, because I think the most damaging thing I've seen to refugee communities and asylum seeker communities in particular is this endless period of limbo whereby people are really motivated to move forward with their lives, to reunite with their families, to become homeowners, to advance in their careers. And they're limited by the fact that maybe they have work authorization in the short term, but they can't stabilize their status. They can't formalize it. They aren't in a position to bring their family over. There's no resolution. And, to Sam's point about mental health, after the trauma that a lot of refugees and asylum seekers have suffered in their home country, the biggest negative influence on their mental health day to day is just the ambiguity around their futures here in the US. So figuring out a way to make that clearer for everybody would be better. That isn't to say, that everybody gets asylum or everybody gets refugee status, but just to give some finality to folks is a big deal. I also think this is probably the topic for an entirely different podcast that, Briana mentioned our refugee protection system and the international refugee protection system are kind of framed in a certain way. They have a certain idea of what violence looks like, a certain idea of what drives people to leave their countries that was really conceptualized right after World War II. And so our law's idea of what persecution is really driven by the World War II experience. But we're in the 21st century now. And the things that force people to flee their homes are different. There is still state violence, certainly. We see that all the time. But there are a lot of non-state actors that drive people to leave their homes, that commit violence. And then there are more kind of amorphous structural forms of violence, economic violence or climate-driven violence that need to be addressed in our refugee protection scheme moving forward, because we're going to continue to see people move, but what pushes them to move, as horrific as it might be, is lining up less and less and less with the definitions we have under our law. So we need to think big picture and systemically about how to build a refugee system that works in the new century.
That's great. What about you, Briana? What changes would you like to see?
Well, first of all, I'd like to wholeheartedly agree with everything Bobby just said. Modernizing our definitions is integral both for the refugee admissions program as well as the asylum program. I've worked under both, and you very often, as an attorney, hear stories that deserve protection just based on common sense. But unfortunately, the definitions and the strictures of the program don't always allow for that. In terms of hopeful next steps, things we would like to see, while this certainly is an extremely difficult moment in the history of refugee admissions and other humanitarian pathways to the United States, I do think we can take this opportunity to really center stories like Sam's and remind ourselves why we have these programs to begin with, what their value add is for our communities, and center individuals and individual families and their stories and how we think about these programs. It's very easy to get distracted by numbers and statistics and forget, right? When we're talking about the stop work orders and the halting of these programs, we are talking about real people with real lives who, from one day to the next, the rug got completely pulled out from under them. So moving forward, I think centering those kinds of stories can really help us better understand the impact
That's
that these kinds of changes can have.
It's exactly right. I think it's important just to remind people over and over again, this is a fundamentally patriotic exercise. Supporting refugee resettlement is an act of patriotism. It's not anti-American. It's not trying to undercut our institutions or insert violence or chaos into our society. Quite the opposite. It is reinvigorating the American dream that we like to invoke in rhetoric so often.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Sam, what about you? What kinds of changes would you like to see, having been a refugee yourself and now with your amazing organization working with refugees every day? What are some changes you'd like to see?
Yes, thank you so much. At this moment, they need to change the picture they are painting, the refugees. They need really to, in fact, feel them like they belong, they welcome. This new administration really needs to fix that. They need to stop dehumanizing these people. They have been through a lot, through enough. Now it's time to, I mean, the American integrity has always been welcoming the foreigner. This country was built by immigrants. This is why it's successful. This is why we see all these AI companies say, hey, bring us more smart people from outside the country, from India, bring them in here. And refugees, when you bring a family that has kids who are going to become US citizen, come on, you are bringing all the good stuff to yourself. In fact, you are robbing their countries, their origin. So they need to see that picture. The refugees are the most vetted in terms of security people ever. It took me 8 years to come to the USA. Imagine if we could have came sooner, if I could have came within 3 years, within 24 months, as Briana said that it should take refugees to come here. What if I could have been so lucky like these Afrikaners in South Africa, these white South Africans, that took them like 2 months or even a month to be brought here. This is not how the US operates. US is a country that gives opportunity to all, and protecting our borders shouldn't affect the refugees. Refugees, they don't come here with bombs. These people who come on visa, come on, they get I-94s at these airports. And then they have to start on the ground, bringing their family, working these jobs that Americans do not want to do anyways. What does that person, what is this person stealing from you? What kind of wealth is he going to take away from you?
I mean, in conclusion, obviously our country and specifically your community of Amarillo is so much better off for your refugee resettlement journey, and not just your amazing organization, which, like I said, we're going to drop the link to for listeners, the work that you do and the work that you and your family have done in Amarillo. But again, it's a benefit to everybody, and Texas knows that. And that is why Texas is one of the highest recipients of refugees in the country. For me, this work is also personal. My mother came to the United States as a Cuban refugee, and I knew growing up that behind every resettlement story is a family holding on to hope, a legal fight for safety, and a community that either shows up or turns away. And so today's conversation is just one glimpse into that larger story. And I could not agree with you, Briana, and you, Bobby, and you, Sam, further that just telling these stories and getting the true and accurate depiction of what refugees do, how they help our community, could not be more important and crucial and critical in this time where we see immigrants, whether they have come lawfully, whether they've come the right way or the wrong way, how they have been so demonized by this administration. But I want to just leave with a call for listeners to do whatever they can to help, to go and visit your organization's website and contribute in whatever way they can, even if that's just uplifting the story of their own connections to refugees or immigrants. And so I wanted to thank you all so much for spending your afternoon with us and for the work that you all do day in, day out. And I look forward to staying in connection with you all. So thank you so much.
Kristin, I knew we had a kinship of some kind. My family also arrived as Cuban refugees in the 60s.
They did. That's when my family came.
There you go. Refugees and their families are all around us. So yeah.
That's right.
Excellent.
Awesome. A fellow Cubana.
Yeah. Chris, just one more last thing. Since I'm the founder of this refugee organization, it's a grassroots organization. I would maybe urge our listeners to, of course, support financially. I have a very spacious office where we welcome the communities. It's an open door policy. We welcome everybody. If they can support me, I would really appreciate it. And of course, support Briana and her organization. We are non-profit, tax exempt. If they need all those good stuff that comes with it, of course, we can send those letters. But they will be blessing they'll be blessing this work that we do, that we care about, and being just open to these communities because we get to serve them behind the scenes and firsthand. Yeah. Thank you so much.
We'll drop a link for listeners to support Sam. Thank you so much. And also, Sam, we're going to be taking a trip to the Panhandle soon. So I hope we get to meet in person and that this is just one of many conversations and collaborations that we'll have together. So thank you all so much.